We're now going into a session where we're focusing on, if you like, focusing the microscope a little more from our fairly broad session this morning to really look at ethnic diversity of apprenticeships. I get to just introduce the first person and then to sit and listen, so I don't have to keep jumping up and down for the next hour. So it's a great pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, Isa Mutlib, who's the Executive Director of the BAME Apprenticeship Alliance. And Isa's with his colleagues here, and I'll allow Isa to introduce them, but Isa is going to take you through the next hour. Isa, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Is this on? Can you hear me? Good morning, everybody. My name is Isa. I am the Executive Director for the BAME Apprenticeship Alliance. I want to take a different approach for today's panel. Wanted more of a conversation from our panelists. Now, this is my first time on stage, so expect some nerves, but hopefully we'll have a very fruitful discussion and something that we can take some information away from. So I wanted to firstly give a quick introduction to our panelists and let them introduce themselves. On my left, you've probably seen him this morning, Chris. I mean, everybody's approached him and said, oh, you're the guy in the video. So I think there's no introduction needed, but it's Chris from IBM. He's an apprentice at IBM. Then we've got Fiona from the Learning and Work Institute. Next to Fiona, we have Matt from Severn, Trent Water. And last but not least, we have Becky from Coca-Cola European Partners, sorry. This has been on the government's agenda for quite a while. You probably heard earlier today from my colleague Safraz that the government launched a report back in 2015 with regards to the BAME 2020 vision. And that was to have an increase in BAME apprentices by 20%. Now, whilst that looks like an easy objective, there was a lot of obstacles and a lot of challenges ahead for organisations and learning providers and the communities in general. And you probably heard some of the barriers too with regards to people from Asian communities going into university, preferring it as a natural route as opposed to apprenticeships. One of the key stats, which I'm sure Fiona will go into in a bit, was that there was a 20%, back in 2015 and 2016, the application cycle saw a 20% of the applicants were from the BAME community. However, only 10% made starts. So these are some of the stats that are now coming out, and organizations are now seeing these stats and looking at ways in which they can address some of the issues in BAME recruitment of apprentices. So I wanted to first go on to our panel and ask them to give a brief introduction to themselves, a bit about apprenticeships within the organizations or what the apprenticeships mean to the organization, but also some of the challenges they faced around apprenticeship diversity. Let's start with Chris.
Great stuff. Hello everyone, I'm Chris Achiampong and I'm a degree apprentice at IBM. I work in the sales team and the systems hardware team, so if anyone wants to buy any kit, just let me know. I'll be able to sort you out, discount rate, best friends. But prior to that, my journey into an apprenticeship started from, I was actually playing football, so I was playing for Arsenal for 4 years. And unfortunately, due to a career-ending injury, I had to kind of look at other ways of, I suppose, growing my profession or just going into the professional world, I suppose. Academically, I was always quite capable. I come from an African household where education and attainment is imperative. So mum and gran, were reluctant to let me drift away, I suppose. And that transition from football to work was okay. But for me, from my background, I come from a single parent household in a low socio-economic area environment in East London, like Stratford, when it wasn't Stratford, so it was the slums. And no one wanted to go to Stratford, but now Westfield's there and it's amazing and etc. But anywho, so coming from that background, it's, I suppose, the two kind of ways of making it out is, becoming, I'm very honest, by the way, so please, just excuse if I touch a few nerves, etc. So there's two ways, so become a footballer or, become a drug dealer. And for me, it was made very apparent about the lack of opportunities and, the lack of kind of role models and inspiration. So I didn't know about the Canary Wharf, I didn't know about London Bridge, all of these places. I thought, if you're wearing a suit, it's, oh, where are you going? Are you going to court? That sort of thing. So, so for me, my experience into the world of work was extremely interesting. It was through an insight program at EY, Ernst & Young. And I was I worked for EY for a couple of years, trained to become a chartered accountant on their school leave program. And that was a fantastic experience, and then moved to IBM. And for me, IBM provides, a life-changing opportunity for apprentices, and their apprenticeship program is absolutely phenomenal. And I can assure you they're not paying me to say that, even though one of my colleagues are here today. So, but it's just been a great opportunity, and there's so many kind of great opportunities out there, great apprenticeships, etc. And trying to source diverse talent. And for me, diversity isn't just like a tick in the box exercise. It should be one that adds value to companies, and I do strongly believe that it adds values, provides different perspectives, and recruits from different skill set. But I'll let someone else take the floor now. Thank you very much for listening.
Fiona.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah. I'm Fiona Aldridge. I'm from Learning and Work Institute, and we're a research and policy organisation that's been working with the department on apprenticeships for a number of years. And in particular, we've been working on issues around access to apprenticeships, and that can be around ethnicity or around gender or around learning difficulties and all the things that Jeremy talked about earlier. We're doing quite a lot of support and evaluation work with the department on that. And the reason why I'm up here is because a couple of years ago we did some work for the department where they were interested in what they needed to do in order to meet the 20% target that we've heard about already this morning. And we were particularly asked to look at the Find an Apprenticeship application data. So if you're going to, one of the ways of applying for an apprenticeship is to go through the Find an Apprenticeship website to register and then apply for posts that come up. And one of the big issues was that although BAME although people registered were over-representative of the Black, Asian, minority ethnic population, the number of successful applicants were well under. And the work that we were doing was to try and explore what the issue was, what it was in the application process, what it was around perhaps the roles that were being advertised, or the process, or some of the people and qualifications and experience that people had, to see what that issue was. And it was really surprising, I think. So we'd done some review of the evidence, a lot of Jeremy's evidence and other evidence, some of which we've talked today, to think about where are some of the issues in the system. And it was really interesting, for example, to hear this morning about unconscious bias and the recommendation that everybody should do that training, because the figures underneath that are really interesting. So if you take two identical CVs, and one of those CVs has a sort of a minority ethnic sounding name as opposed to a white sounding name, then those white sounding names are 70% more likely to get through the application process, even if the CV is identical. So of course there are all sorts of issues that aren't just about the application process through Find an Apprenticeship, but we wanted to look what happens through that process to see where the barriers were and what government could do about it. And what was really interesting is that the success rate for ethnic minority applications is half of that for white applications. So people Far more people are registered than than representative of the national population, but far fewer getting onto apprenticeships, and it's a halving of that success rate. But when we looked at it in more detail, what seems to be the issue, or certainly through this data, is that it's all about geography and sector. Of course, there are other things involved, but for this data, it's about geography and sector. So just as we've talked about here, that ethnic minority applicants tend to be living in areas where there are fewer opportunities. So the success rates are lower anyway. And therefore, as a consequence, they're applying from areas they live to the opportunities in that area, and there are just low success rates of anybody getting onto those applications. And therefore, for those individuals, they are much less likely to get on. So one of the recommendations that came out of our research was that the government should take a locally targeted approach to thinking about how to address this 20% increase. And the initiative that Jeremy talked about earlier is part of that outcome. So government is looking to set up 5 local hubs to get local areas to think about what it can do to increase apprenticeship starts and, of course, completions and successes among Black, Asian and minority ethnic applicants. And we'll be doing some support for that programme and some evaluation of it, and I look forward to, at some point, being able to come back and tell you some of the great experience that people have had whilst working on those hubs.
Oh, good afternoon. Certainly from our organisational perspective, I think we approached the issue from a slightly different angle from what we've done. We have a very broad customer base. We've got 8.5 million customers across our patch, and we have some of the highest areas of sort of diversity in the country, in places like Birmingham, Coventry and across Leicester. But just a glance across our organisational workforce shows that we're broadly unrepresentative. And indeed, in some areas, we struggle with gender as much as we do ethnicity in terms of representatives. I think for us, the way that we viewed it is we are a sector that predominantly has a very large ageing operational workforce, which gives us an opportunity over the next 3 to 4 years to really change our approach and change the composition of that workforce. But we weren't going to do it by simply going out and doing the recruitment side of it and doing the attraction side of it, of saying, making sure we've got positive role models on our posters, on our literature, making sure that we're engaging with the right events. We were already doing that, but we weren't really seeing, although we were doing better from an apprentice and a graduate recruitment perspective than the organisation in general, but it still wasn't particularly great. The way that we've approached this very much is investing in the selection process itself. So what happens after you click apply and your application goes into the system? And we've partnered with an organisation to move towards a strengths-based recruitment approach, which we launched last year. And we've just had the first cut of data from our first year of application. We've actually showed for the first time we've produced a recruitment process that has no adverse impact across ethnicity, gender or social mobility. And we weren't even looking to fix the social mobility problem. That was just an added bonus that came off the top of it. But by going into the fairly minutiae, because I think there's some very good points that Chris makes about making sure that there's role models in the community. I think there's a very good point about making sure that the application, the actual roles are there, and I think it's endemic on employers to make sure that you're looking to maximise those opportunities where you can do to bring new blood and new perspectives into the organisation. Absolutely, everything that Chris said about new thinking, new views is really important. But there's no point in generating those opportunities and that groundswell of interest if the first thing that happens is 95% of those applications fall at the first hurdle. Because not only do you miss out as an organisation, you've then promised the earth and failed to deliver. And one of the things we felt really, really strongly about is if we are going to go out and promote our organisation as a place where you can come in and you can thrive if you come from a different background, then we need to make sure we have a process that supports that. Not that it advantages anybody, but it's absolutely fair and we can put our hand on our heart to do it. So it was a very boring, very occupational psychology led, lots of statistics, lots of testing, lots of focus groups, and it all went on largely behind the scenes. We certainly couldn't make any good press out of it. But what we've seen this year is for our graduates, we've gone from 18 to 33% BAME hires. And for our apprentices, we've grown from 3% to 12%, which for the engineering sector that we predominantly recruited is about 4 times the national average. Now, by no means is that the full picture. There's a huge challenge we've got to face around how do we create a working environment that has all the necessities that we have for, we have some sites where we've never had a female apprentice before. So we're having site managers for the first time are having to think of, hang on a second, we've only got one shower block, one toilet block and one changing room. So how do we fix that? And how do we invest in that? So similarly having the sensitivities we have for some of those sites. And we're looking at sites that were built in the Victorian era. So we are dealing with a bit of a historical legacy. But that first port for us wasn't so much making sure that we were doing all the right advertising and doing all the right kind of videos and presenting that picture. It was like, what's the actual experience candidates have moving through that process? And we chose to focus on that primarily certainly from the last years, and it really seems to have paid off. And certainly from an organisational perspective, I think the challenge is now moving to say, how do we make our overall corporate environment one where diversity in its broadest sense is accepted? Because a lot of organisations talk strongly about their culture and their values. Well, how inclusive is it to talk about culture and values when you're actively recruiting people who you want to be different to what you've normally recruited? There's no point in recruiting people into an organisation and then trying to rigidly make them conform to a set of norms. And it's a challenge we're trying to face at the moment, is how do we have enough conformity, so we're creating an environment where people work well together, but enough authenticity to allow people to bring, as we say, the whole self to work. And we don't have a silver bullet to that yet, but that's really is the sort of the focus that we're moving on to next for ours. It's not just to get people interested, to get people recruited, but then what happens once you're in the organisation for the 3, 5, 10 years that we hope you're going to remain with us.
Thank you.
Sure, does this work already?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Becky Gardner. I work for Coca-Cola European Partners. We're in 13 different countries. But in GB alone, we've got about 4,000 employees. Predominantly, those are in the front line. We actually make and distribute the Coca-Cola family of products across the UK. So one of the things that we bring apprentices into our supply chain sites where we make them, and they're predominantly into engineering. We've got quite a big history there, but the apprentices have really been in to try and change the ageing demographic that Matt talked about. I actually head up bringing apprentices into our commercial part of our business, so into the front line, going into stores such as the local pub or your local newsagent or your local Tesco. And our objective for bringing apprentices into that area is a very different one, and it's more about actually we don't reflect the local communities that we operate in. We haven't got a high BAME percentage into that population, so that was our number one objective, as opposed to doing it from a skills gap or actually from a gender point of view. We actually have a very healthy gender diversity coming into those roles. It's not to say that gender isn't important to us. From a diversity point of view, we have 5 areas that we look at, and gender, disability, sexual orientation, and generational is really important, as well as looking at ethnicity. So in terms of, I just want to talk specifically around what we've done with our commercial apprentices. We started in 2015. And we brought our first cohorts in last year, so we brought 10 in. And we used a quite different approach to what we would normally do when we're recruiting sales reps in the traditional sense. We worked with an organisation and we developed an online challenge, almost like a game, where they market themselves and sell themselves to apply for the job. So it wasn't a traditional application form. There was nothing around actually looking at their name, their qualifications. In fact, we got to almost the offer stage and we didn't actually know whether some of them had more than the English and maths associated with getting some of the funding with the apprentice. So it was a completely different approach. The recruitment team absolutely hated me because I was making them test all their procedures. And they wanted to do like a competency-based interview, and I was like saying, no, how can we go to do a competency-based interview? We just want to know what do they enjoy, what's the strengths they're going to bring, what's their motivation, and different questions around that. So we actually partnered and we went into local schools and workshops, schools and colleges, We targeted London area and also Peterborough, where we've got a customer contact centre. Some people might want to call it a call centre, but we don't call it that. So it's more of inside sales there. So they were the two areas we targeted, and we targeted schools and colleges around those areas. And we talked about actually upskilling the students in there. We talked about how to do a handshake when you go for an interview, as well as then they could apply for our apprenticeship scheme. From that, we then actually held what we called youth event days at our offices, and we did some more upskilling, and that was in doing a customer service exercise and also an interviewing. And the actual incentive was that if they did well at that, they would win the prize to come to the assessment centre, which was ultimately an apprentice with our business. And that worked really well. We had our first recruits that started last year, and we've repeated the approach for this year, and we've got 17 new hires that are joining us in September. And we've actually targeted schools and colleges with a high BAME percentage on purpose. So we've actually got, I think our hires are 44% BAME and 58% female of those 17. So fingers crossed that they'll actually all accept. I think about 12 of them have to date, because they're actually going out in trade, they're trying the job before they actually buy it, so to speak, and to make sure that they like it. Because we did have one person leave last year. He said, actually, I would prefer to go and work in an office. This really isn't for me. And we're actually saying, well, look, try that first of all, see if you like it. I think one of the challenges that we've got is I wish I could borrow you, Chris, as a role model, that we're starting from scratch. I almost want some role models to come with me, because I'm not the best role model to talk to our target audience that we want to attract. But luckily now we have got an apprentice, but we need to get some more BAME role models that we can take in with us. The other one, and I think it's been mentioned a few times, is this unconscious bias. We did unconscious bias training with our managers, but I still had to challenge them hard about, look, if they all could do the job, then let's pick that candidate from an Asian background. And well, no, I prefer that one. No, we're going to pick and I had to really challenge them hard. So there's still an ingrained culture in there, even though they've had the training. It's almost like I think I need to do something else, but I'm not sure what that is. And then the other thing was is convincing them actually that doing an apprentice is as good as going to university. It's not the only choice. And because one of the things that we found is actually they were saying, well, I'll go and upskill with Coca-Cola, learn about how to do interviews, but then actually I still want to go to university, which is fine. We don't mind investing in that way, but it's because they feel that the choice is still inferior. And then I guess the other challenge is actually some of the parents. So what we've tried to do is involve parents and say, look, you can come along. We're going to do a graduation. We're going to invite the parents along. They could actually come to the youth event days, as well as the teachers as well, that we've tried to educate as much. So we're sort of learning as we go along. There's a lot of companies in the room that have got a lot more history than ourselves. But we've got lots of challenges and lots of learning along the way.
I think one of the things that we've realised is, looking through our sources of applications and hires for the last 10 years, our single biggest source of hires into our business for apprenticeships has been recommendations from family and friends. Yeah. And there's an awful lot of it, and on one hand that's great, because people are obviously thinking so much, saying it's a great apprenticeship, it's a great opportunity, it's a great company to come and work for. But at the same side, that's one of those things where we're actually trying to sort of push that a little bit more. So we've got turning those people who go out and recommend us into more of the sort of community advocates for the scheme, because otherwise you're going back and saying to somebody who looks exactly the same as me with a child, you should really send Bobby to come in and join our apprenticeship program because it's absolutely amazing, brilliant, Bobby applies and goes. It's little things like that we were starting to tease out and realise actually that's probably, in inverted commas, part of the problem. Is because of that enthusiasm, because of that, absolutely this is really, really good, you end up having these kind of unintentional consequences, I think, from some of those. It's particularly an organisation like ours. I mean, we've been recruiting apprentices for 150 years. I think at a glance at some of our sites, I'd swear some of them are still working for us. But But in that, you get quite an ingrained sort of history of that, and that legacy actually becomes a bit of a drag, because we're viewed as a blue collar, fairly hands-on. There's only so exciting you can make sewage treatment sound. We acknowledge that, but there is sort of trying to come away and paint that different picture, but using that enthusiasm that the business has for it, but actually saying, rather than tell your neighbours about it, go into your local school, which has a very high BAME population, very high free school meals population, and tell them about it, because you can tell 150 people in an assembly about it, rather than just your neighbours' sons and daughters. And it's trying to get sort of harness those little things, because we always used to view that as a source of pride that people would recommend it. Then you sit down and realise that, well, why is our application pool 96% white? Because those are the people that are recommending our programme. That's our biggest source of it. So there's a little bit about changing it. I think one of the things for us has also been is trying to make it easier for the line managers. I've absolutely had the same conversations where I've had a line manager saying, I'd really like to take, in this case, the female candidate, but there's a £40,000 cost for that, as far as that, because I've got to build a female shower. And it's acknowledging that that actually is an issue for one of our site managers, because he has to find that money. And that's when you go corporately and saying, the blocker for some of these things is that we don't have the right access, we don't have the right facilities, we don't have the right side of it. We need to acknowledge that as an organisation, have that conversation and say, well, which of our sites are friendly, which ones we could put it at, how much can we actually do to move people around to make that work, and where do we actually have to invest to create that right environment to people in? Again, you can go out, you can role model, you can promote, you can have the best application process. The fact of the matter is, if you arrive on site and there's no facilities for prayer, for example, that's going to be a massive, massive barrier. And it's one that's absolutely within our gift as an employer to fix. But you have to be honest and face up to some of those and think, we are actually going to have to put a little bit of money in that. The opportunity cost of not doing it is you're shutting off talent pipelines. I think my boss has always been quite clear. We have skills gaps and skill shortages right across almost every single opportunity we try and recruit for. Why would we do things that prevent us from hiring really good people from, in gender case, 50% of the population, or an additional 20% of the population for BAME? It just doesn't make any business sense at that level. So if we have to invest £250,000 in facilities, it's a small price to pay when you look at the 2,000 vacancies we recruit every year, not just apprentices but across the board, that we then have to fill. And we're slowly but surely getting some of the people, more of line managing the business, to realise that I'm not going to get the best apprentices unless I've got a site or a facility or an office or a team that's actually set up to receive. So,
yeah, thank you very much. You've all presented some very interesting points. And the interesting thing about it is that you've all presented from different perspectives of, we've got an apprentice, we've got from a research perspective, and we've got from the employer's perspective. Now, you've all probably heard of the 3 million target, but the biggest question is, with the target of an increase in 20% of BAME apprentices, is that achievable, given your honest opinion? And if so, or if not, what are the best practices, or what are the best practices in terms of recruitment or retention that, and anything else around it that you as an organisation do and can share with our audience today? Because there are some employers here, there are some training providers here, so we want to get the full perspective of it. But also, it's important that we get the perspective from an apprentice up to the employer and the research side as well. Becky.
I think some of them I've talked about. I guess one of the things that we're looking at is how do we maybe think about the concept of adopting a local school or college. So using almost the resource that we've got, because we've been using an outside provider to help us, because this is not my day job, this is just an add-on to my job that I do. So thinking about actually if we could get managers across the country to actually target a school or a college near them, then we provide them with the tools to go in and talk about apprentices, to talk about actually apprentices per se as an avenue, as opposed to going to university or other routes, then that would be helpful. And we'd also want to look at from a hard to fill area, but also from the BAME percentage, and how do we represent our local community that they go into. So that's something that we're going to actively look at. The second thing is that I'm starting to connect with maybe our wholesalers and other organisations that we maybe sell to that have got a higher ethnicity demographics to ourselves and in the communities that they sell to, and how I think that we could make some connections with them. So, for example, could we offer an apprentice in our company, but also an apprentice in their company? We're still at very early days, but that's where my vision is that I'd like to take it, that we try and, do some co-benefit or partnerships.
Matt?
I think for the 20% target, I'll answer that in two bits. My first view is that in the short term, probably not, and I think from a numbers perspective, it will actually get worse. And the reason being is one of the great things I'm looking at with regards to the apprenticeship levy is the fact you can now use apprenticeships as a training mechanism for your own employees. Now, if I look at the huge amount of upskilling and reskilling we need to do over the next 3 to 5 years with some of the changes that are coming across the utilities industry, because the utilities industry does actually change. It's not as boring as everybody makes it seem to be. Just a quick plug. We've got to have to do a huge amount of internal upskilling and reskilling, and absolutely we want to offset our 1.3 million pound levy that we've got to do some of that. That, looking at our operational workforce, which is 95% white and 85% male, those numbers will all be reflected somewhere in a government statistical package that will say actually all of our work will on paper have been absolutely undone because of all the internal apprenticeships. So we're starting to position the statistics internally about between new talent coming into the business and existing training. But I think from a pure stats point of view, the numbers may look worse. But I think eventually with the growing level of access and the business imperative that we've got, that the levy is forcing us to do, I think that number will climb and climb and climb. And I think as apprenticeships change, we have our first cohort of MBA masterships starting this year as well. You're starting to offer up opportunities of that level, the range of standards that are coming on stream over the next 18 months, and looking at the levels that they then can go in. There is no skills area I can see in our business that we can't put a new talent program into support, and the business is coming to me and saying we really want to do this. So I think if we combine that with the recruitment process that we've got and the right partnering up front, I think that in the medium term that number will be attainable. But I still think there'll be a statistical oddity while a ton of companies attempt to push through all the upskilling they've been holding off doing for the last 5 years, and now we have an absolute business imperative to do. But I do think it is about that, for me, it's about looking at that full employee life cycle. Attraction, resourcing, recruitment and selection piece, the unconscious bias element, the systems and processes, and then it's almost looking at the law of unintended consequences as you go through. So rates for promotion, for pay increases, access to opportunities, do we have the right, and the little things down to interview panels, selection panels, when we have talent forums where we calibrate talent across the business, that's looking at that composition in the room, making sure we've got as broad a representation as we can have with the population. So we're starting to really look at, actually, we've got 5 managers who are promoting, we ended up with 5 managers who are promoting gender diversity at senior level, and 4 were male. And you can instinctively, things like that don't look right or feel right. So it's kind of going in and saying, we may have the right diverse range of opinions in the room. It doesn't necessarily follow that, so because you are male, you cannot have a view or a positive approach to this, but we need to make sure we're really checking on it. So it's not necessarily the person who waves their hand in the air to volunteer is the person. It's maybe sometimes the reluctant individual who actually say, you don't want to get in because you don't believe in this sort of thing, because you don't think it works. Well, fine, come in and tell us how to do it better. But that's, like I say, it is a really almost issue by issue, calling it all out and then thinking about what can we fix, what can we sort, but what ultimately is going to take 5, 10 years, maybe a generation to shift within the business. So, but I think it's acknowledging and being clear about where those challenges are.
Fiona.
Thank you. I think given the underrepresentation we have at the minute, that just increasing the quantity of apprenticeships will mean that we won't hit the 20% target. If we do what we've always done, we will get what we've always got. But I think having a target does focus the mind, and I think therefore if we can use that to think about what we might do, then I think we should aim to achieve it and work hard to do that, and see what happens. I think a couple of other things around apprenticeship reform could make or break it. So we've already talked about the levy. The levy could be a great opportunity if employers are thinking about recruiting new people, to think about who they recruit, and also to think about which of their existing staff that they put onto apprenticeships, whilst recognising the point made that if your staff is predominantly white, then you don't have as many choices to correct that imbalance as you might have. The other target that I think could be quite helpful in helping meeting this one is the public sector target, where public sector institutions are required to have a number of apprenticeship starts. It's proportional to their workforce every year. And we've been doing some work with public sector employers like local authorities, like NHS trusts, and like education providers. And one of the things that they are really conscious of is that their workforce does not represent the communities that they serve, and that this is a great opportunity for them not only to tackle their ageing workforce issues, but to tackle some of the diversity issues. And I think if employers can be supported to think about how they attract a more diverse workforce, then we could make significant progress. But I think there are many conflicting drivers in the system, but it doesn't mean that we should not put out all the stops to try and make this work.
Just to add one more thing, one thing that we've also started to look at is our supply chain. So we have an extensive supply chain and some massive framework contractors that we work for that do an awful lot of our field-based work. We are now baking into our contracting process an expectation of both their support for new talents, apprentices and graduates anyway, but also they are now weighted on the A in terms of their composition of workforce from a BAME and gender perspective, but also their initiatives and their views of doing it. So we mandate that they must have a certain percentage of new talent or new talent vacancies, graduate and apprenticeship vacancies, but we also weight. I must admit, it's not a significant part of it, but in the difference between two closely awarded contracts, it will go to the people that most support our view in terms of diversity and a desire to grow apprenticeships. So we are starting to put a little bit more of a commercial edge into it and baking it into the supply chain than the contracting and procurement processes, which has actually been a bit of a wake-up call for some of our organisations who have suddenly quite cruised along on terms of purely on price, and now we're actually looking at how they support our agenda in that space as well.
Chris?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm conscious of and slightly sceptical about is that with that target, that the quality of apprentices will decrease, and so that they don't have the skill set or the assets to actually do the job, and we're just trying to fulfill a certain quota. So that's my skeptical hat on. But I think you just got to be careful of how you approach it, and I think it's really, really important to not kind of focus too wholly on, okay, we need more BME apprentices, and but more kind of how do we kind of recruit them, doing things differently. I think you touched on something very, very, very interesting. I want to see kind of recruiters in churches and in mosques and stuff like that, and I think you've got to be slightly more radical with that approach. Speaking to families, as I said. So, as I said, my family are from Ghana. I had an offer to study at a Russell Group University, study economics. I turned around and said I'm doing an apprenticeship, and they nearly had a heart attack. So it's that whole education piece, and really, really getting them to understand that an apprenticeship doesn't necessarily mean, okay, you're going to be an electrician for your life, but there are a spectrum of apprenticeships being provided, white collar, blue collar, etc. But I think in terms of a short-term perspective overview, I think what the government is doing is very positive in terms of the advertising, the Get and Go Far campaign, the promotions, etc. And it's just really kind of looking at different talent pools. So I've had the privilege and the pleasure to attend so many different schools and various parts of the country. I've been over to Exeter, where not a lot of people look like me, or I've been over to East London and a lot of people look like me. It's that whole spectrum, but it's just really articulating the message around apprenticeships and how that can resonate with young people, and I enjoy doing it. So I suppose a few people have touched on the whole ambassadors piece that's very, very positive. You guys are amazing at promoting it, etc. But I do think it does help when someone slightly younger, sorry, you're all young, but someone who's just recently been through the process, they can, relate to them and say, hey, that used to be me, like 2 years ago, I was doing my GCSEs or my A-levels, and I can see that trajectory. Also, getting into schools, going into schools and liaising with them, having that schools partnerships, and, sometimes even giving them a bit of cash to perform some workshops, around, career services in schools is quite shocking, but it's improving. For me, for my career services was just, go to university, Oxbridge or Russ Group, do your A-levels, and that was it. So, but I think that is changing. But going into schools and saying, look, we have various offers on board. Can we work together, create some workshops and some fun activities, and provide insights into what we do in our company? I think that's so interesting. As I said, I love going to schools. They're often receptive of kind of hearing about apprenticeships, and I think that continues. That needs to be continued. So I think I touched on all the points that I wanted to address. So, but I do think long term, it's all around kind of changing that perception. And I think that's going to be a generational thing. Apprenticeships, just the connotations behind it and the impressions that it creates. It will be kind of a generational thing. Young people will think, okay, it's not just a thing to do. When my friends were going to university, it was, oh, why are you doing an apprenticeship? Well, why would you do that? Okay, I'm going to just do what my friends are doing. No, try and be, I suppose, articulating the benefits of my apprenticeship. So at the age of, I'll have a degree with no debt. I'll be paid a salary, and I've also had kind of a great experience at a top company. And a lot of grads will come out, just because their friends went to university or their family told them to go to university, with debt, and then going into an increasingly competitive market to find a job that they didn't really study for, or they haven't got the skill sets to actually perform the actual role. So it's just really being clear and getting apprenticeships on the same level as university, and as I said, I think that's going to be a long-term thing, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm a positive, proactive believer, so we'll get there.
Sorry. I think the point about quality is really, really important, and I think it should be everybody's bugbear, actually, because even if we hit the numerical target, even if we get 3 million apprenticeships and 20% of those are a 20% increase for BAME, and we hit the other targets as well, then if we don't give those people good quality experiences, then those numbers won't sustain. You'll just have 3 million people doing low quality provision, and word will get around, and then as soon as we've hit that target, people will go back to I'm not going to do this because I know someone who did and they had a terrible experience and it didn't lead anywhere. And so while we need to think about numbers, most of all we need to think about the quality of those experiences. And it's great to hear about the quality of the two employers up here. And we would like to see every apprenticeship be of that quality, but I don't think we're there yet. And I think we need to make sure that we are getting really good, strong jobs with great training for each of those 3 million young people and adults, so that they are progressing to great jobs, great incomes. Because if we do that, then word of mouth will really spread the message, and that we won't need big advertising campaigns, because people like Chris will be going, I did an apprenticeship, it was the best thing I did. Look, he's going to come out with his degree and all the experience he's got at work and no debt. That is so much more powerful for people that he comes into contact with than any marketing campaign can. And so I think whatever we do to focus on numbers, we must put even more effort into focusing on quality.
Absolutely.
I wanted to bring Becky in just towards the end of this in terms of the quality side of BAME apprentices, and touch on the points of Chris with the fears of focusing on the numbers rather than the quality. Is this something that you found when engaging with communities when recruiting BAME apprentices? And what are the things that Coca-Cola are doing around this?
We've actually had the opposite problem. We've had we could have offered more apprentices jobs than what we had jobs for, because our jobs are location based, I had managers afterwards saying to me, Becky, that they're like better than any of the quality that we get when we do our normal recruitment campaigns. The passion they have, you know, it's just a new, it's infectious as well with the managers. They can't wait for an apprentice to join. But yes, we could have offered 3 times the amount that we did, but unfortunately they're location based as opposed to being able to offer in several in one office. So I've not yet experienced that problem.
Okay.
So.
Thank you very much. I wanted to bring the audience into this discussion. I think it's very important. We've got a good diverse range of organisations out there. So I wanted to hear the opinions, the thoughts, the questions that the audience has to our panellists, and see whether we can get your perception from this. My colleagues are around with microphones, so if you put your hands up, there's quite a few hands already going up right at the back.
Good morning, my name is Richard Lambden. I work for 2 training providers in London. I suspect that organisations on the panel probably pay their apprentices a very good wage. Nationally, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's £3.70 an hour is the bottom. At the moment, does the panel think that the salary also has an impact in attracting a diverse range of people and helping with social mobility?
Matt.
I'd say yes. I mean, our starting salary is for this year will be £15,100 because we've got. You may notice there's a small car maker just down the road that probably no one's ever heard of called Jaguar Land Rover. So we have a fairly intense local level of competition, which drives up the costs of some of the apprentices coming in. But I think that there is. I think Chris touched on it about talking about going to university in debt. I think if you're effectively offering a salary that in some cases you were almost paying to train yourself once you've taken in factoring cost of living, particularly if you're asking people to relocate, you do end up in a situation where that will be starting to put people off. We very much committed to do is that we wanted to offer a salary that was attractive to get into the door, and the progression that you get on it is very attractive as well. So I do think it does play a part, but I can see why the perception of these stories about low-paying apprenticeships and below national minimum wage, and in some cases having to, you purchase your own uniform, your own tools, etc., to discharge it. That doesn't help, I think, when it comes to employers like ours who are offering high-quality apprentices that are well-paid. To Chris's point, it starts just to chip away again at that perception of the apprentice. So yeah, I think salary is critical. You don't have to pay the earth, I think, to attract good apprentices. But I'd also say we've noticed, locally we've always had the competition, but nationally the competition for apprenticeships is starting to hot up. And I think to slightly counter Chris's point, the competition we've had this year to fill our role since the levies come onto it, it's starting to resemble much more the graduate recruitment market at the other end of it on the Russell Group universities. And it's gone to that in about 18 months, whereas previously we wouldn't have struggled to fill roles. We've still been out for good quality, higher and degree level apprenticeships, and we're getting apprentices that are getting counter offered, that are getting 2 or 3 different offers. So there's going to be an imperative, certainly in certain locales and certain industries, where salary is going to become a real critical deciding factor, I think, not just at the bottom end, but also at the top end as well. It's great for the apprentices. Not so great when I'm getting people dropping out in June for an August start because they're going off to, in one case, is IBM. Oh, the irony. But it is, which is great. But it's great for the apprenticeship side of it. But it is, I think, employers who are thinking you can get away with cheap labour. So, some sectors maybe, some locales maybe, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to do that, I think.
Can we get Becky as well?
Yeah, I mean, equally, we offer above the minimum wage. I think ours is 14,000, so it's a lot. But also, you get a car, you get an iPad, you get an iPhone. It's a really attractive offer. But we've done looked at that from a business point of view. That when you think about I think the stats are from McKinsey. If you get a diverse organisation, and for performance, if you've got from a BAME point of view, it goes up by 35%. So our business get that. It's less than what we would be paying somebody. It's for 12 months they do their apprenticeship. And then after that, hoping that they'll be successful in passing that, they get the salary for the role. So we haven't got an issue with paying that. And yeah, I'm not embarrassed that will help attract the higher BAME and just generally people that want to do an apprentice more.
Thank you very much. Is there another question out there?
Hi, I'm Dan Power from Reed. We talked a lot about unconscious bias this morning so far. I think I'm interested to see what the panel think about the older apprentices and whether we can attract older apprentices, which will help with the figures and the statistics.
Statistics, was it?
Yeah, just about getting to 20%, getting to 3 million starts. We've all talked about young people, schools, careers advice, but we haven't really touched on attracting older apprentices.
I think Fiona's probably best with this for statistics-wise, yeah.
Of course, one of the ironies is that we have all talked about young people, and if you think about the apprenticeship marketing campaign, it's very much focused on young people, and yet if you look at the age profile of people undertaking an apprenticeship, it is not predominantly about young school leavers. And if you think about the experience we've talked about here, about the levy and what employers will do in response to that around training their existing workforce, they're not 16 to 18-year-olds either. So I would imagine that we'll see the average age of an apprentice increase over time. And that's some great benefits around upskilling adults. If we're going to have to work for however long we're going to have to work for, then actually stopping training in your 40s and 50s is not sensible for an individual or for an employer. So I think it is really critical, but I think there are then some challenges about attracting older people. So often if we speak to older learners about doing an apprenticeship, they'll say, oh no, that's for young people. But actually there's a strong demand from employers. So I think it's one of the challenges is that an apprenticeship being all sorts of things, being about new entrants and existing workforce, about young people and older people, is that it can be really quite complicated about getting the messaging right. Linking back to the issue on pay, I think there can be added complications there around age. So if you're living at home with your mum and dad and they're mainly doing most of the bills, if you get an apprenticeship on £3.50 an hour, that might not matter, but it might if you have a mortgage to pay and children to support. And so I think thinking very carefully about the sorts of support in the workplace and the advantages of having older apprentices in the workplace as well needs to be really carefully thought through, if that's deliberately what we want out of the apprenticeship policy. But I think there are some mixed messages there. Absolutely, they will make up a significant proportion of that 3 million.
Thank you very much. I've just been given the 5 minutes signal to say that lunch is in 5 minutes, so I don't want to delay it any further. Thank you very much to our panel. What I'm going to ask is for our panel to give a 1 minute concluding words for today. Do you want to start with Becky at the end and work our way down?
I think from our point of view, I think we're approaching it more from the diversity point of view around the BAME as opposed to the generational piece that you just touched on. I think we are passionate about bringing new individuals into the organisation, but we haven't had a chance to talk about, we are also looking at for our own employees as well, from an engagement and a retention point of view. So we definitely, our driver has not actually been the levy, and I think there's a lot of benefit to be had beyond talking about the levy.
Thank you very much. Matt?
I think it's recognising the advantage and the benefit of diversity in its broadest sense. I mean, whether that is from a gender and ethnicity point of view, I think from an age point of view as well, for different worldviews and different experiences. I think my summation is the challenges are systemic. I think it's both in terms of the raising aspiration, role modelling, attraction, how you recruit, who recruits, and then how people come into the business and progress through the business as well. And it's worth, if you're going to look at this, it's worth looking at it in a systemic way. I think otherwise you'll end up in a situation that we were starting to do, where we would do a lot of great attraction work and not have that translated into actual results. It's almost starting with looking at the whole of the life cycle and making sure where's the bits that we can pick off and tweak it quite easily. Because we found there was a number of things we could change relatively quickly and straightforward. I also think the other thing is it's not going to change overnight or in 1 or 2 or 3 recruitment cycles. I think to the point we're going to be seeing probably a generational shift before we're arrive at the stage where apprenticeships have an equal weighting along with degrees in other professions and careers.
Thank you very much. Fiona?
Thank you. Despite having the target about increasing BAME starts, what's been really exciting about today is hearing people talk about their intentions and their ambitions for diversity. That's not about targets, but is about individual life chances and the economics of the business bottom line, that it makes absolute sense for individuals and for businesses to be more diverse. And while that is the case, I think we have a great chance to get there over time, as you say, rather than just having a target that we hit or miss and then lose focus on. I'm quite excited about the work in the 5 areas that will take place in order to get some good local strategies. And as information comes out about those areas, if you find you are living, working, operating in one of those areas, then given that all of you here are passionate about this agenda, then I'd really encourage you to take part and see how you can put your efforts into making that work at a local level.
That's not Chris.
Yeah, for me, I think there's there needs to be a focus on kind of the education piece, and as I said, so educating young people around what are apprenticeships, what the benefits consist of, and how they can, I suppose, progress and push on as well. Obviously, educating family, that's so important. That's probably one of the biggest barriers, and I think also the schools as well. So the way the schools are assessed in conjunction with Ofsted, etc., will also be a factor. I think now there's legislations around how schools are putting kids into vocational courses and stuff like that, and that's going to be measured. So I think that's a positive move, gets apprenticeships on the level playing field. But as I said, and as I mentioned before, I think I want to see more kind of radical approaches. So going into the churches, going into various kind of institutions and places that recruiters and people who have never been before, and using young people as ambassadors, and not just actually young people, people that have been through the ranks and are, very, very senior, and they turn around and say, oh, I'm an apprentice, or I started as an apprentice. And that for me is so powerful, because you often assume, especially in these white collar professions, you go in and you think everyone's Russell Group or Oxbridge, and so to have that reassurance that you can climb up that ladder bodes well.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking our panelists.